So now we'll take a closer look at one group of the biological molecules, the carbohydrates. So the monomer of a carbohydrate, as we mentioned, is called a monosaccharide, mono meaning one, and saccharide sugar. Two really common examples of monosaccharides are glucose and fructose. And I have here for you two different structures or two different ways to write the structure of glucose. So the one on the left is a linear representation. So all of the atoms are the same in both of them. It's just the structure on the one on the right is a ring structure, and the one on the left is a linear structure. Depending on the conditions, glucose can exist in either the ring form or the linear form. It's more common that we will see it represented in the ring form that you see here. Now, what I want you to notice again, just like all four of the biological molecules, this is a carbon-based molecule. It contains three different elements. It contains carbon, it contains oxygen, and hydrogen. Now, the other thing I want to point out to you in the structures is, for example, in this ring structure, when you see these lines coming together, what that means is there's a carbon atom right there. Those lines are representing bonds, right, as atoms come together. And in chemistry, it's just understood that if something is not written in there, then it's understood that that is actually a carbon atom there. So I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out to you. The other thing I want to explain is as you go on through the semester, what you'll notice is many times, just sort of as a shorthand way of designating a sugar or glucose, instead of all of the atoms being drawn in, it may just be written as this six-sided ring or a hexagon, and so that would represent a sugar molecule. Now let's talk for a second. Remember that for all of the biological molecules, they have monomers, right? And these monomers then are bonded together to form larger macromolecules. And in the case of carbohydrates, the larger molecule, the polymer, is called a polysaccharide. So poly means many, right? Saccharide, sugar. So it's many of these monomers that are bonded together. Now we know that if you build up a molecule, so if you put monomers together, right, the way that that happens is through something called a dehydration reaction or dehydration synthesis. And the reason that we called it dehydration is because in that process, a molecule of water was lost. So if you need to review that, go back to the first overview video. Now there are four examples of polysaccharides that I want you to be familiar with. So starch, which you already know something about, right? You may think about starch in your diet. If you are avoiding starch, then you don't eat pasta, right, or potatoes. And what is starch? Well, if you think about pasta and potatoes, those are both plants, right? So this is just the way that plants store their excess energy. So plants go through the process of photosynthesis where they produce their own food or they make glucose. And in storing that glucose away, it's put into this larger polymer, right, called starch. So it's an energy storage form. That way plants can use it later, right? All living organisms need energy, and so they can break down starch as an energy source, but when we consume plant food, then the starch that we're consuming we can also break down and use as an energy source. So that's why it provides calories to us. Now glycogen is the polymer. It is also an energy storage type molecule, but this is in animals. So for us, when we eat a large meal, it has lots of sugar in it, lots of glucose, we don't want the levels in our blood, glucose levels, to get too high. They need to stay in a specific range. So our body then designates, our cells designate that these excess glucose should be stored, right? And they're put together in a larger polymer called glycogen, and they're stored until a later time when we need to use that as an energy source. Now chitin is actually not an energy storage molecule. Instead, it serves a structural purpose. And in this case, if you think about arthropods like insects, when you step on a bug and you hear that crunch, part of that is because in their exoskeleton, some of what gives it the structure is this molecule chitin. Cellulose is also a structural polysaccharide. This is found in the cell wall of all plants, so it helps provide rigidity and structure to plant cells. Now remember, the dehydration synthesis I mentioned is how monomers are bonded together to build up the polymer. What you see here is two monomers or two monosaccharides that a bond is being created between the two to form what's called a disaccharide. Okay, di means two, so in other words, this would be the first step in building up a polymer. This process could continue on, right? Add another monomer on, that would be 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. Now this is the water loss, right? So a molecule of water is released or lost, but instead a bond is formed, okay, between these two. Now I mentioned disaccharides, and I wanted to show you a couple of important disaccharides that you probably are somewhat familiar with. And the one on the left is called lactose. So this is the milk sugar. So when you drink milk, this is the sugar that's found in milk. And it's a disaccharide made of two monosaccharides. So it's got one molecule of glucose, which we've already talked about, and one molecule of a monosaccharide called galactose. Sucrose is what we call table sugar. So when you put sugar in your tea, if it's not an artificial sweetener, if it's actually sugar, sucrose is what you're using. And sucrose has a molecule of glucose and a molecule of fructose. Fructose has a sweeter taste than does the sugar glucose. Now let's take a little bit closer look at the structure of the polysaccharides that we've talked about: starch, glycogen, cellulose, and chitin. And remember, I'm going to just draw a line here between the top two and the bottom two. These up here are the energy storage forms. Okay, starch is the plant one, so I've got corn here to remind you that's in plants. And glycogen and animal storage. So we store away glycogen in both our liver and our muscle cells. Down here, these are the structural polysaccharides. Okay, cellulose making up the cell walls of plant cells, and chitin, as I mentioned, the polysaccharide that's found in the exoskeleton of arthropods. So one thing I want you to see about all of these polysaccharides is they are polymers, right, of single monosaccharide sugars. Now, in some of these, there's branching going on, or it's just a linear chain, or they may have some, in the case of chitin, they may have some side chains or some functional groups that are bonded to this, but you see this common, right, sugar molecule in all of these polysaccharides. So they are just many of these individual sugars put together.